Hey, what's up friends? Baldwin here. Welcome back to the Speaker Lab channel where we're going to be doing another speech breakdown. Today we're going to be taking a popular commencement graduation speech from Steve Jobs where he spoke at Stanford University over a decade ago. So this is a little bit of a grainy video, but I think you're going to like it. I think you're going to get a lot from it. Also going to be talking about the differences between a commencement graduation speech and what a typical presentation or speech should look like. There's one thing that Steve does really, really well right at the beginning in his intro, setting up the rest of the talk, but then there's some other things that he does that I would recommend that you not do. So we're going to talk about those as well. So lots to get into. Let's break down this talk from Steve Jobs.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories.
All right, I really like that as an opening because one of the things that we've talked a lot about on this channel is that humans are drawn to stories. And so as a speaker, stories are one of the most powerful weapons that you can use. And we have no idea. He just said he's going to tell us 3 stories. We have no idea if these stories are going to be funny or sad or interesting or entertaining or boring. We have no idea where these stories are going to go. All we know is that we as humans love stories. So it's a good, I like that as an introduction of just saying like, hey, all I'm going to do is I want to tell you 3 stories. Now again, no idea where this is going to go, but I know I'm excited to hear all 3 stories.
Story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why'd I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list...
Now let's talk about commencement speeches for a second in like a graduation type of setting. So there's a couple of differences here between this and what a typical like keynote speech or presentation might be. So one of the things is he's looking at his notes and he's pretty much reading his notes quite a bit. Now, if you're giving some type of normal speech or presentation, this is typically something that you would not do. You're not going to be glued to your notes because the more that you're glued to the notes, the more you're going to be disengaged from the audience. So ideally, if possible, you don't have any notes at all, or if you do, it's just maybe a note card or something with a few keywords or a couple of key lines that you want to recall or remember. The other thing too is that he's basically standing there behind the lectern the entire time. So as a speaker, I'm not a fan of that, but it's pretty traditional that you would do that in this type of commencement setting. But typically I like to have that lectern out of the way, the podium out of the way, and so that I can move all over the stage. But again, traditionally in a commencement graduation type of talk like this, then this is typically what a speaker is going to do. So just again, understand the differences there between this and what a typical talk might be like.
Got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition.
Now, one thing he did there is he snickered a little bit with the joke. So Steve Jobs seems like a very serious type of person. He's probably someone that didn't make a lot of jokes and doesn't use humor a lot. It just seems like a very serious, stoic person. So as a speaker, if you're the type of, let's say you're more of an intellectual type of speaker, your talks are more deep, that you don't use a lot of humor, when you deliver a line that could be construed as funny, sometimes the audience doesn't know whether you meant it to be funny or not. So when he says a line like that, some of the audience may be thinking like, oh, that was funny. That was a good line. Yeah, Stanford is expensive. And some of the audience may be thinking like, is that meant to be a joke? Is he pointing out something that's an actual truth, or like what is the point of that line? But when he snickers and when he laughs or when he cracks a smile, it gives the audience to do the same. So remember that from an audience standpoint, that if you're a speaker who uses a lot of serious content and you have like a funny line, that if you laugh or you snicker or you smile, then again it kind of cracks the ice, cracks the tension there, and it gives the audience permission to respond in the same way.
After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor.
Now that what he was just talking about there of dropping out is kind of oxymoronic in a way, where he's speaking to a audience of graduates about how he dropped out. So kind of interested to see where this goes, but you can kind of feel as an audience somewhat of a tension of like, is he allowed to say this? You know, is this going to be misconstrued, or is this going to be, like, where's this talk going? So it causes us to almost creates a little bit of tension in a good way of like, where is this going to go in terms of what the main idea is that he's trying to get across.
Friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College.
Now, obviously he's reading this, but what I want you to do, here's a fun little experiment, is I want you to close your eyes and just listen to the talk, okay? So you can continue playing it, listen to his presentation, listen to his talk, and does it sound scripted? Yes. Does it sound like he's just regurgitating it? Yes. Which causes you as an audience member to typically be disengaged. So a good exercise is whenever you are speaking, if you record yourself, which is a good thing to do, record yourself and listen back to it, because some speakers are very, very scripted in their presentation. They're very, very scripted in their talk. And so listen back to it and think, does this sound like it's scripted? Does it sound like I'm just regurgitating a manuscript? Or does it sound like I'm actually speaking and connecting with the audience? So good exercise there. You don't want to be on the side of, I'm just regurgitating a manuscript. I'm just reading a script off. That's not what you want to be doing as a speaker.
That time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's like...
Let's talk about speaking indoors versus outdoors. Now, obviously, he's outdoors. You got a flag in the background there that's blowing all over. If possible, okay, it's beautiful, it's a beautiful setting, but when you're speaking outside, there are so many variables that you cannot control. As a speaker, part of what we're trying to do is control as many of the variables as possible to keep a controlled environment. And so when you're speaking outside, you lose a lot of that. So generally, again, if you're going to speak at something, they've already dictated and determined here's where you're going to be speaking. But if you have a vote, if you have a voice at all for an event where you may be speaking, and the option is to speak outside versus inside, always speak inside so that you can control as many of the variables as possible.
That no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out,
dig at PC
I would have never
there.
dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference.
Well said.
My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton.
Now this is a powerful story about a huge big name entrepreneur, this very important person in entrepreneurship and in business and in life. And he's telling this really powerful story, but it loses so much of the power because he's just reading it, right? He's just reading off of a script, and so him sharing it loses all emotion. There's no emotion to it at all. It sounds like he's reading us a story, like a bedtime story. Once upon a time, I started a business, and then I got kicked out, and it was a very public thing, and it was very sad. And it's just like, was it? Because I'm not feeling it, right? Now again, I get it that this is a bit of a different type of context and setting in a graduation, but this is what happens whenever you are glued to your notes and whenever you're just regurgitating off of a manuscript, is you lose a lot of the power of the word. So you lose a lot of the power of the story itself.
Was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the Valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next.
Okay, so That's a good example of where there's some type of applause break or there's laughter. You want to let that subside before you continue. So he delivers a line, audience starts laughing, cheering, applauding, and he just keeps going, right? So two things that happen when you do that is, one is that it kills the moment, right? You kill this moment of just like celebration and engagement with the audience. But the second thing that happens is he starts in and a bunch of the audience is still clapping and applauding and they can't hear what he's saying. So you want to let that subside before you continue.
Turn to Apple. And the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking. Don't settle.
Stay quiet. Don't say anything.
My third story
Let the applause die, and
is
then
about
continue.
death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me. And since then,
There's another example of like, it's a good line, it's a true line, but the audience wasn't necessarily sure, is it supposed to be funny? Is it supposed to be serious? Is it supposed to be kind of a poignant point? Or is it just supposed to be, you know, something that's more funny that we're supposed to laugh at? The audience went with laughing at it, and it's a graduation, so they're a bit more relaxed kind of vibe it feels like so far. But as a speaker, you're the one that can kind of help cue the audience on that. So if he smiles, if he laughs, if he snickers, if he cracks a joke or cracks a smile at all, then it gives the audience permission that, yeah, that was meant to be funny, so it's okay to laugh.
Past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. This was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day. Later that evening, I had a biopsy where they stuck an endoscope down my throat, through my stomach and into my intestines, put a needle into my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now.
Well.
This was the closest I've been to
It's another good example of him telling a story. It's a very powerful, emotional story, but because it's read just off of a script, it loses a lot of the emotion, it loses a lot of the power. So again, I keep coming back to it. I know I'm drilling on it and harping on it, but when you're telling stories, whenever you're delivering a talk, don't be regurgitating a script, be present with the audience.
Death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary.
As a speaker, you're going to get dehydrated or parched or thirsty at some point. So if you're needing to take a drink, try to find either a natural spot where either there's applause or there's laughter or there's some break in the action that allows you to take a drink. The other thing too is that if you're going to take a drink, you can make a joke about it. Don't carry it on and drag it on, but you can say something, deliver the line about being thirsty or about being dehydrated or feel like you're living in a desert or something, and then move on. So if possible, try to avoid taking drinks when you're speaking. Try to drink a lot ahead of time, not so much that you have to go to the bathroom the whole time that you're speaking, but if you do need to, try to find a break in the action where it makes sense to take a drink so that you're not interrupting the flow.
When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
Very good. All right, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that speech breakdown of Steve Jobs' Stanford presentation. As always, if you like this, make sure that you comment below. Let us know what you learned from this presentation that you're going to be applying to your next talk or speech. Also, let us know if there's other speeches or presentations, TED Talks, or presentations in general that you want us to break down on an upcoming video. So let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video so that we know what you like and we keep producing more of it. All right, my friends, we'll catch you next time. You're awesome.